I look at the work and I can't believe it. It's so well done, but he knew where to put those models with that sub. And so every rule that we think is the right way, same with music. You do the same thing, and all of a sudden a crazy band comes along doing something completely different, and they're the new thing, right? So, but I still think it's so important. You got to learn your craft. You know, it's nice to rely on technology, but boy, if you have that arsenal inside of you where you know, then it's just going to make you a better, more well-rounded photographer.
Absolutely. And it gives you that sort of creative vocabulary to then take it to that next level and maybe push the boundaries a little bit and, and break the rules a little bit. Because that's how you end up creating your own personal style. I think that's also really important, over time.
Yeah. And you were talking, just one more note on the film digital thing. I still believe you take two pictures, exactly the same thing. You take your film and you take your digital and you make two prints, and there's a difference. If you take a handmade print from a beautifully exposed negative and compare it to a digital image from a digital file, I still think there's an elegance to the film image that's better. To your point, when you look back at some of this old work and you say, oh my gosh, these beautiful prints and it's really hard to beat a beautiful black and white or you color print that's beautifully printed, right? It's the
Yeah,
best.
absolutely. It's very hard to beat a print that's on your wall compared to something that's on a screen, you know, which is why I'm always like suspect of these digital picture frames, that you can hang on a wall, you can stand on your desk or whatever, and it cycles through a whole bunch of images. And I always think, my mom had one of these ones, and I kind of thought, like, why would you do that? They will look terrible in there.
And there's that gratitude of knowing you made that print yourself. You stuck it out in the dark room and did it yourself and had to do it 15 times to get it just right. Or at bare minimum, you took it to the lab, worked with the guy if you didn't make color prints at the time, there's a little bit of labor that you put into the image, right? And, it's like cutting your lawn. It took you all day to cut your lawn, and you look out at your lawn and it's beautiful and you did it.
It's the terrible cakes that I bake. When on the rare occasion that I bake a cake, I always love them. Everybody else hates them. But that's the labor bias. I put all the labor in.
Yeah.
So clearly it's great.
It makes you happy. You have to do it.
Absolutely. One of the things I really loved about when I read when I read up about your work and stuff is how much emphasis you put on connecting and communicating with your subject. Um, because I find it, as a portrait or as a headshot photographer, I find it that's the most expensive, the most important aspect of what I do is creating that connection. How do you go about that? How do you connect with your subject?
Well, I would start by saying my father was a great people person. He could walk into a room and everybody liked him. He had great stories to tell, and I grew up with that. So I think I'm a good storyteller myself, and I like people. So every subject that I've ever had is different. I go in knowing that if there's not that human connection, the picture's probably not going to be very good. It's going to be lacking that soul, that weight, right? That you achieve when you look at a great photograph. So I go in a lot of times, in most cases, I've never met the person I'm photographing. I may have 5 minutes with them. That's the hardest one. That's the hardest one to get, because especially if they're famous, the likelihood of you piercing their soul. They're photographed all the time. They're in front of the paparazzi. They're being catered to all the time. For the most part, they're just there to do it because they were told to do it. And let's just get through this thing with this guy and move on to the next. That's the hardest one. It's the hardest. And so I go in, try to be as prepared. If you're photographing a farmer who's never had his picture taken, there's good and bad to that. The good is they're probably going to give you a really great moment, an unguarded moment, an innocence to that picture because they've never had their picture taken. The bad is they've never had their picture taken. So you've got to be still on your toes, whereas if you photograph an A-list celebrity, they are probably going to give you the guarded image that they give everybody. If their best side is their left side, they're going to immediately turn to their left side, right? And so those are very hard too, because if I go in thinking that I'm just going to go photograph that person, because most of the time they don't even know who I am. So the days of me going in thinking that somebody like Roger Daltrey knows who I am, he probably doesn't. A lot of times I'll say to somebody, hey, did you see my work? No. Here I am thinking I got hired because the artist saw my work. They never saw my work. It was either the creative director, the manager. But what I try to do, Kirsten, is find out what else that person might be interested in besides music or acting. Comedy changed the whole dynamic of the shoot. He completely came around, and instead of being like this, he got into it and was like, oh yeah, and that was the turning point. If you look at the frames that were made during that session, they were all just okay and pretty predictable until we got to that fishing. And those were the images. They were right there, because all of a sudden I had him engaged. He was laughing, right? He was into it.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that clip, then press here for the full episode in glorious Technicolor. Hey, and don't forget to subscribe.